It's about to go down.
Yes, so down.
Yes. With
David Hooper.
Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. Man, I love that. So over the top, like so many DJs that you may have heard. If you've ever listened to radio shows, Sirius XM, internet, then the DJ usually comes on and it's like, hello everybody, the new such and such single. Here we got the 12-inch from this, the master mix from this, the funky mix from this. Over the top, letting somebody else introduce them and then they come in and they're low-key. You ever seen a DJ dance? You have not. More comfortable behind the turntables. That is not you. You're a podcaster. I'm trying to help you expand on that, market your podcast, get a bigger audience, make more people care about your message, make money with your message. And I've got what I call a wedding DJ trick. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. This is an episode about audience interactivity. And this is about building tension. It is part 1 of 2. If you want to get the next part, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. You will get that next episode as well as the other episodes that I have about building a better and bigger podcast. So here's the deal on this one. It's an audio message from Steve Stewart. You know him from the Podcast Editors Club. It talks about 2 very important things for podcasters. And the reason I had that DJ intro and talk about that, Steve's got what I call a wedding DJ trick. Steve was a DJ. I was a DJ. And there are some tricks that DJs use when you're doing a party, a wedding, even a club, where you're trying to have interactivity with the audience. I talked about this in my last book. One of the reasons that I think dance music is so popular is because everybody is the star in a dance club. You've got a DJ, of course, and modern DJs, a whole lot more flashy than they used to be. They used to be behind a couple turntables. That was it. You heard them, but you didn't really see them. These days, even though these DJs are stepping out into the forefront, a lot of it's about lights. A lot of it is about the experience. The audience becomes part of that experience. That concept is what I'm going to talk about on this episode. Before I play this message from Steve Stewart, let me give you a little bit of backstory. I had written something in my newsletter about interactivity with listeners and how podcasters can benefit from having more interactivity with listeners. The newsletter, it is at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. There's also an audio version of it in the feed. So if you go on to bigpodcast.com/subscribe, you subscribe to this podcast, you've probably heard the audio edition of the newsletter. But what you really want is newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Anyway, Steve sent me something on audio. I'm going to play it for you right now. And he talks about something you can do when it comes to getting people engaged.
Hey, David, I'm responding to the piece in your newsletter said the next big thing in podcast is talking back. And you're talking about how it's good to get the listeners involved. And what I found back in the good old days when I was doing my podcast, the Money Plan SOS podcast, was I had a tagline. So the show was called Money Plan SOS. I was helping everyday Americans. And here's the tagline: pay attention, not interest. After a while, it became something that you would expect to be at the end of every monologue, every episode. You know, I'd throw it in there somewhere where it just kind of closed out the segment. For example, I would end the segment talking about, we'll just say budgeting, so that you can pay attention, not interest. It would end typically like that. But then a few times I would go, so you could pay attention, and I would pause. I wouldn't say the rest of the phrase. And instantly, people who had been listening for a while, who knew the catchphrase, their brain would automatically fill in the last 2 words, not interest. I think it's a lot like a wedding DJ when they are playing Shout by the Isley Brothers. You know, they're playing the song and then the chorus comes up, you make me wanna, and they drop the audio. And what does the crowd do? Shout. And they put their hands. So it's kind of like that. That's how I equate this, this pay attention and fill in the blank bit. Take care, brother.
Now, Steve Stewart, Podcast Editors Club is how you know him. If you are an editor, you want to have an editing business, you want to get better at editing, Steve can help you out. Check him out, podcasteditorsclub.com.
Attention, this is the Big Podcast Supercomputer with an important correction. Steve Stewart's organization is called Podcast Editor Academy and can be found at podcasteditoracademy.com. You will now be returned to build a big podcast, other parts of which are correct.
Let me tell you the science behind this, what he's talking about. Basically, it's this. People are predisposed to close what I call open loops. So if you can leave something open, people want to close it. The example that Steve gave, he had his tagline, so people know what is coming next. And also the Isley Brothers, that was a music example. And you've heard that if you've ever been to a wedding. It's been in several movies. That song was so big, the Beatles covered it. So there's a whole generation of people that know it from the Beatles that might not have known that that was originally an Isley Brothers song. Anyway, let me give you a more recent example. If you're under 30, maybe under 40. This song became a big hit because of this concept. At least that's what a music business friend of mine told me. He had analyzed several hit songs. As you know, I'm in Nashville, songwriting, music publishing. It is a big deal here. So my buddy Jay Frank, he went in and analyzed a ton of hit songs, and he put out a book about it. It's called Music Hit DNA. He mentioned this song to me. Of course, I knew it right away. Big pop hit, catchy. I'm going to do a little bit of analysis of it right here for you. I don't want to get too technical because I don't want to lose you. But I want you to think about songs that you know. Most songs, they start and they end on the same note. There's a feeling of closure. You know when something has ended. It's a big production. They ramp up the tension. Dun dun. It's done. So there's this song. You've heard it. It's called Wannabe by the Spice Girls. I want you to check out this intro melody. You know what I'm talking about. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. It's a full thought. It starts where it ends, and then it goes right back to the beginning. And I want you to think about that, how it connects. Here's the one riff. And if we connect those to each other, it continues and it makes sense and you can sing over it. So you've heard that song. That's the intro of it. And this isn't the point that I'm making about tension, but I want you to make note of it because it is important to that point. I'll play another clip. This is the melody. It's the same thing. It ends and then it loops. Are you singing along? If you want to be my lover, gotta get with my friends. Make it last forever. Friendship never ends. You know that. Everybody was singing that back in the 90s. Here's the catch, though, and this is why my friend thinks it was such a big hit. At the very end, it goes into the intro, and then it goes to the chorus. And then it stops. Throughout the whole song, you've been singing the chorus, and they leave you hanging. It doesn't have that closure. It's like Steve's example. Makes me wanna, what? Shout. If you want to be, what? My lover. If you do not close something, there's a part of your brain that is left feeling like that thing is incomplete. This is such a cool concept for podcasters to think about. Where can you leave something within your podcast that your listeners will finish off for you? Steve had the tagline. Maybe you've got something that you say at the beginning or the end of every episode. At the end of every episode, what do I say? I say, if you want to subscribe, go to bigpodcast.com. I've got 3 buttons for you. I already said at the beginning of this. What am I going to tell you? Got the RSS feed for your old school podcasters. I've got an iPhone button. If you're on iPhone, push that one. If you got an Android, got you covered. 1 button is all it takes. I say basically the same thing every single time. So you're waiting for me to get through those moments each and every time. Sometimes I change it up. What you don't want to do, and I mean this literally, is play a recording. Sometimes I'll see podcasters end where they'll press a button and they'll play a closing message. You hear a lot of that at the very beginning of episodes, and then somebody comes in with just the interview. They think they're being productive. They are not. If it's the exact same thing, people are not only filling it in, it's not that interesting. But if it's a little bit different, even from the phrasing, and you let somebody fill it in themselves, then it's stimulating in 2 ways. 1, it's a little bit different, and 2, they're completing that open loop that you're giving them. I mentioned at the beginning that this is episode 1 of 2 talking about audience interactivity. On the next episode, I've got another example of how you can use this concept in your storytelling, and that can be documentary storytelling, narrative nonfiction storytelling. It can be in interviews. We're going to get deeper into that. That's on the next episode. Now, what am I going to say? If you want to get that episode, you need to subscribe. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Go to that page. I've got 3 buttons. What are those 3 buttons? You know, RSS. Got one for iPhone, got one for Android. 1 click's all it takes. 1 click for you to subscribe and never miss an episode. So go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I'm David Hooper. Bigpodcast.com is the site. I will see you there, and I will see you here on the next episode. Part 2 of this series about audience interactivity on the next Build a Big Podcast.